If you've played FF7, you'll know Jenova as an extraterrestrial scourge who crash-landed on the planet 2 millennia ago. Driven solely by an instinct to destroy, she insinuated herself among the Cetra by means of mimicry and subterfuge, infecting them with a deadly virus. On the brink of extinction, the Ancients managed to seal Jenova away, only for her body to be exhumed by Shinra researchers 2,000 years later. Jenova lies at the very core of FF7's crisis, her deadly legacy amplified by the almighty soldier manufactured from her remains. As an entity in the game, she lends a layer of eldritch horror. Her mind-reading and shape-shifting abilities, now wielded by her chosen child Sephiroth, create an atmosphere of dread and distrust. However, Jenova wasn't always the Lovecraftian nightmare everyone now knows her to be. Her character underwent an extensive amount of rewriting over the course of FF7's development. In fact, at the very beginning, Jenova wasn't a character at all. Our deep dive begins with the FF7 Ultimania Omega, an official FF7 companion book published in 2005, about 8 years after the game's release. Included in its many pages is a section called the Early Materials file, which features a slew of initial concepts for the game's characters, world, and scenario. Some of these are reflected in the final version of the game, while others were scrapped or heavily modified. A subsection titled Alternate Takes is where we find the earliest chapter in Jenova's history. Jenova, a term referring to a certain region of the brain or genes. The name comes from the Jenova, a manuscript left behind by a race of people known as the Ancients. Though the Jenova ordinarily goes unused, there are rare cases of it naturally awakening in individuals. Jenova, manuscript. A manuscript said to have been written by the Ancients. It's contended to be either a book of God or a book of the devil due to the terribly detailed and wondrous nature of its contents. The worked pages focus on the brains, or genes, of living things, apparently providing a record of everything pertaining to the uncharted enigma that is the human mind. That said, understanding all of what's been written down is a different matter. To make things worse, the world is littered with documents thought to be created in imitation of the Jenova, though nearly all of them are patent flights of fancy. The following entries go on to introduce super beings, a group of individuals whose Jenova has awakened. This process can occur either naturally, in the case of Aerith and her ancient ancestors, or artificially, in the case of Sephiroth and other soldiers exposed to Mako. We also learn that materia are conduits to manifest the force of people's Jenova, and that artificially awakened super beings possess a keen ability to sense Mako-rich regions, namely the Promised Land. We can see then how the Jenova would have played an integral part in FF7's early scenario. It provided a basis for magic use and superhuman abilities, as well as an impetus for the narrative's main through line, the quest for the Promised Land. As we all know, this early concept was ultimately abandoned. But when and why? Where did the idea for Jenova being a shape-shifting interstellar menace come from? We don't have a straightforward answer to this question, at least not from the writer's own mouths. But with a little bit of detective work, we can draw some very compelling conclusions. First, however, we need to talk about the person likely responsible for that change, and what role he played in FF7's development. If you're a fan of the Final Fantasy franchise, then you've almost certainly heard the name Kazushige Nojima. He's responsible for penning the scenarios of games like FF7, FF8, FF10, and the Kingdom Hearts series. He's also currently at work on the FF7 remake project. Nojima joined the FF7 development team sometime in early 1996, after taking a short break following the completion of Bahamut Lagoon, another Square RPG he helped direct. As such, he wasn't present for the game's earliest planning stage. By the time he arrived, the concept for Midgar had already solidified, adapted by director Yoshinori Kitase and character designer Tetsuya Nomura from an early premise drafted by producer Hironobu Sakaguchi. Though a late addition to the team, Nojima joined the project early enough that the game's characters still hadn't been fully formed. Kitase credits Nojima with defining FF7's dual heroines. Moreover, momentous plot points, including the tragedy that befalls Aerith, still had yet to be decided. In a 2003 interview, Nojima recalls thinking that the plot was quite far along by the time he joined. However, when he read it carefully, he realized the entire middle of the scenario was missing. Therefore, as scenario writer, Nojima's primary role was to unify the game's disconnected premise, reconciling ideas from Kitase and Nomura with his own and those of other staff members. One such early concept came by way of Nomura. It was a vestige of Sakaguchi's early plot proposal, which saw a hot-blooded detective named Joe pursuing the game's protagonists. Nomura flipped this idea around and initially had Sephiroth and a group of black-cloaked companions being pursued by Cloud's party. Nojima found this early concept on the project's local dev server and eventually used it as the model for Jenova and the reunion. Instead of chasing Sephiroth, Cloud's party ended up chasing Jenova disguised as him. The Ultimania Omega's early materials file gives us some insight into what this initially looked like. Whenever Cloud and his party encountered a black-cloaked man, they'd fight a piece of Jenova's body discarded by the main mass. The first encounter took place on the cargo ship to Costa del Sol, just as it does in the final version of the game. Here, the main party battles a monster formed from Jenova's mummified right arm. Next, they'd fight Jenova's thumb on the way from Cosmo Canyon to Nibelheim, her knee in the Temple of the Ancients, her leg after Aerith's death at the Forgotten Capital, and finally her heart at the crater in the north, referred to as the Promised Land in early development documents. Two of these battles were cut from the final game, and references to Jenova's body parts were scrapped from all but the encounter aboard the cargo ship. However, it's easy to see how, with a few small tweaks, this premise was implemented into the final scenario. But we've once again gotten ahead of ourselves. How did the concept for Jenova jump from a fictional part of the brain to an alien scourge migrating toward the reunion? To begin answering that, we'll need to fast forward to 2012, because it was in May of that year that Weekly Famitsu, a popular Japanese video game magazine, published a revealing interview with our favorite scenario writer. Asked about the sense of mystery that suffuses FF7's story, Nojima mentions that he took inspiration from various movies. We already know that films like Jaws and Blade Runner informed how FF7 introduces certain characters and locations. But in this 2012 interview, Nojima added a new name to the mix. In particular, The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, starring Tomoyo Harada, had a big impact. I wanted to leverage that deep sense of mystery you get from the movie in Final Fantasy VII's scenario. In particular, Nojima is talking about the 1983 film directed by Nobuhiko Obayashi, which was adapted from the 1967 novel of the same name, written by Yasutaka Tsutsui. Maybe you've heard of The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, or maybe not. Either way, it's worth a quick peek at the movie's plot so we can understand how it may have influenced FF7's. We won't attempt to summarize the full story here. For one thing, it's well worth watching on your own, not only because it has strong thematic parallels to FF7, but because it bears eerie similarities to FF7 Remake's new direction as well. What's most relevant to us right now is the movie's final twist. After experiencing a series of bizarre, time-bending episodes, the main character, a middle school student named Kazuko Yamashita, confronts her childhood friend, Kazuo Fukamachi. Fukamachi reveals that he isn't who he's been pretending to be. The real Fukamachi died years ago. Our Fukamachi is in fact a time traveler from the distant future. He explains that he assumed the real Fukamachi's identity, implanting favorable memories of himself in other people's minds so that he could move about freely in the past. In Yamashita's case, he borrowed a core childhood memory she shares with a different childhood friend. It's easy to see the impact of this movie on elements of FF7's plot. Foremost, it mirrors the crisis Cloud faces with his own memories and his journey to discover the truth of his past. Nojima even pays homage to the girl who leapt through time with a line in FF7's famous livestream sequence. Second, it features an entity capable of reading other people's minds and altering their memories to suit its own needs. The parallel with Jenova here needs no explanation. However, the time traveler Fukamachi is far from a villain and bears none of the other traits we associate with Jenova: coldness, brutality, and an instinct to sow destruction across the cosmos. For that, we'll have to look elsewhere. Let's rewind to January of 1997. On the eve of FF7's release, Nojima and 6 other lead developers sat down with the video game magazine Jugemu to toast the project's completion and talk about what went into developing a masterpiece. After conquering his motion sickness from the cab ride over, Nojima finally joins in on the conversation. He shares how difficult it was to tie together everyone's disparate ideas. These included suggestions from Nomura based on movies he'd recently seen. One such movie was Gamera 2: Attack of Legion, a kaiju film released in July of 1996. Nojima says he made an effort to incorporate ideas like this, though makes a point of saying he never plagiarized material. Gamera 2 is admittedly less captivating than The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, but a few points from its plot are worth outlining here. The story begins with a large meteor crashing into Hokkaido, the northernmost prefecture of Japan. We soon learn that this meteor came bearing alien life. Before long, a horde of insect-like alien creatures make their way south and begin wreaking havoc. Their goal is to create a hive that will serve as a launch pad to shoot a new seed into space, continuing their cycle of interstellar colonization. Once again, the parallels with Jenova here are, even if coincidental, extremely easy to see. Furthermore, they're simple enough to be conveyed through a brief summary of the movie, which is likely what Nojima received from Nomura. At this point, it doesn't feel like a stretch to assume Nojima adapted the memory mechanics from The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, borrowed the meteor-mediated expansionism of Gamera 2's alien menace, and combined them with FF7's initial Jenova concept found in the early materials file. What resulted is arguably a more mysterious and compelling creation than can be found in either film, and a testament to Nojima's ability to merge multiple conflicting ideas into a single cohesive vision. It is, of course, entirely possible that these similarities are coincidental. The inspiration Nojima drew from these movies may have taken shape in different ways, or maybe other films played a more important role in determining Jenova's trajectory. John Carpenter's The Thing is one such work frequently cited for its similarities with FF7's millennia-old monstrosity. However, the film has never been credited by the game's creators. Perhaps one day we'll be able to ask Nojima directly about the details behind Jenova's genesis. Until then, we can only keep trying to solve this puzzle with the pieces we have.